Hey, U.S. history students, this is Mr. Baker again. I hope you're doing really well. This is Baker's Corner. We're actually looking at our third lesson of a four-part series on the American involvement in World War I. So let's go ahead and get started. If you remember from our last time, we left off talking about the major causes of American entry into this war. The straw that broke the camel's back was pretty much the famous Zimmerman note that eventually got President Wilson's attention, amongst others, and the American Senate decided, upon Wilson's support and encouragement, to actually go forward with a formal declaration of war. So the question, guys, I want you to think about for today is, okay, where does a country go once it's now formally involved in a state of war? What does it need to do to prepare? What does it militarily have to do? How does society perhaps adjust to a war? All right. In other words, guys, this lesson is very big on the idea of the home front, but also the military we'll look at first. Okay. So the first thing is, guys, is that we have to figure out a way to get prepared. If we're not already in a position, we're kind of a little bit prepared, but not to the extent that some people thought that we need to be. Ergo, we have to figure out a way to get things for our troops. We have to figure out a way to raise food. We have to figure out a way to also have enough weapons and supplies. And another thing, guys, to keep in mind is that we have to figure out a way, how do we get across the Atlantic Ocean? After all, we got all these German U-boats that are actually waiting for, vessels and things like that to actually go across the ocean so that they can actually limit their opponent's success. Well, this is where the convoy system is going to come into it. But before I explain that, it also comes back to military leadership. Okay. And in this war, you'll notice, guys, this person right there is John J. Pershing. Now, a little bit of background on him. If you remember, guys, from our second lesson in imperialism, he's the person that was actually sent into Mexico to apprehend Pancho Villa. Okay. So imagine you're John J. Pershing. Your country is neutral in this war. It's going on. You're there. You're basically supposed to be apprehending this, some people would call him a felon. And you get word that, we are now in a state of war. And your commander in chief, in other words, President Wilson, sends word and he's like, okay, I need you to come back. We have to be ready to fight. And so you do exactly that. And so he's going to take charge of a lot of the preparation that is associated with American troops, the AEF, American Expeditionary Forces. They're also known as the Doughboys. It's kind of like an interesting nickname. And if you look, guys, at the bottom, this is one of the emblems that recognize them. And then also you'll notice a little fun propaganda piece the Doughboys make good. Now, guys, what we notice, and a lot of you guys are aware of this already, is a lot of propaganda posters like the Uncle Sam, I Want You, amongst other things, come out of this particular time period. And so, guys, we notice the very big importance, not that it doesn't exist before, but the importance of really drawing people in so that this is a national movement to support a war and not just one that's more regional. Okay. So once that's done, then we got to figure out a way to get our troops abroad. And guys, if you look here, you'll notice that this is actually what they call a convoy, right? That involves ships. Okay. So you've got this group of ships. The ones in the middle are basically supply ships. They're bringing over, the guns, the ammunition, all those things. And then on the outside, you're going to have the ships that actually are the gunships. They're the ones that are protecting, the folks that are actually trying to get over there to provide, resources. So, guys, if you look here, you'll notice that the Atlantic Ocean has been for many years kind of like that safe space between us and this area of the world because of the status of new technology. The ocean is becoming, not that it doesn't still exist as a physical barrier. We know that it does, or shall we say, a physical feature. But the fact that we have new technology is changing the nature of how that provides security. All right. So that's what makes this convoy system so important. So you'll notice, like a lot of areas that we're seeing troops and also supplies coming from: Montreal, Halifax. Both of those places, guys, as you can see, are in Canada, our friends of the North. And then also places like Boston, New York. And you'll notice, guys, right here, that this is going to be the area where they're going across. And this area right there is where you're going to see, as you can see, guys, with the key here, the most U-boat activity, right? So it's going to be, again, a pretty tough task to eventually get across. And a lot of students, guys, in the past have asked me this, and Mr. Baker, was the convoy system effective? And guys, from what I've read in different resources, it was pretty effective, right? I don't think that we had a lot of major losses and things like that. Okay. So therefore, what do we notice? We notice that the Americans get over there. Now, there's a lot of question mark about American involvement once we get there, because remember, all right, hindsight being 2020, we're going to have officially an armistice to this war around November 11th of 1918. That's what we celebrate, by the way, as Veterans Day. Okay. And so you're like, okay, Mr. Baker, I'm scratching myself on the head here. We declare war in April. We're only involved in the war for, what is it, about a year and 7 months. Okay. And it's not just like now where the technology exists to where you can get your things across, seas a lot easier, right? Or faster even. Okay. So guys, what you notice is that the United States is not going to have as much direct military influence in this war as you will see with wars like World War II, Korea, etc. But that is, of course, down the line. Okay. However, what do we notice by about fall of 1917? And there's a case to be made, guys, that Germany, you can see, guys, the geography here, Germany, Belgium, France, Great Britain. Okay. But what do we notice, guys, about the geography here? We notice that for the most part, still a lot of this war is occurring in France. Okay. So Germany, there's a case to be made that they're trying to save face, right? Maybe they know that they're going to lose, but they want to make sure that they're not losing without putting up an additional fight of some sort. Okay. And so, guys, you'll notice these American expeditionary forces are going to have some influence in some of these key battles, especially that you see in this area here. Chateau Thierry, Second Battle of the Marne, okay, St. Mihiel, Meuse-Argonne Offensive, okay? And so what are we doing? We're basically pushing Germany back, okay, to eventually where they started off. Because remember, guys, if you go back to that Schlieffen plan from lesson 1, they've already made progress into France. You got to basically push them back. Okay, which is why this is called an offensive. Okay, so guys, if you look here, you'll notice that they're actually being pushed back to the eventual borders of Belgium, then eventually, as you can see here, into Germany. Okay, and so I'm going to leave it up to you guys if you want to do additional research, etc. I think our military was helpful in this conflict, but it is going to be something, guys, that is interesting, because when we have this treaty process, that'll be what we look at next time. There's going to be a lot of, shall we say, disagreement over, how to end this war, right? On the part of the United States and countries like Britain and France, because of the longevity of those countries being involved and the amount of death. Now, you don't have to necessarily memorize these details, guys, but again, we call this the Great War for a couple of reasons. This is not really the most pleasant reason, of course, but the idea of not just participants, but also the deaths, wounded, and also missing in action. Okay, now what do we notice, guys, about those numbers compared to the numbers of Americans, of American involvement? And guys, if you do the math, I mean, what is that? We represented about 1/16 of all the people that were involved in this particular war. If you take a look at casualty numbers, that's an extremely small number compared to countries like France and Britain, and of course Germany, Austria, Hungary, etc. Wounded and also missing of action. Okay, so I want you guys to think about, how does the modernization of this war, all right, impact the numbers that you see? It's large scale, of course. And how do you think the way that these numbers kind of came out, guys, how do you think that might impact the way that countries are going to have to negotiate the end of this conflict and to come to some compromise? Okay. So the question, guys, you're welcome to pause this if you want to, is how does the home front of the United States get affected by this conflict. And the reason I bring this up, guys, is because it's very easy when we're in a foreign war, especially, Civil War is a little bit of a different thing, given that it was fought on our soil. But guys, at the end of the day, when we're fighting a foreign war, I think it's very easy if we're not careful to overlook, okay, the basic way that a war affects the home front. Okay. I once had somebody say, and this is actually not just unique to people I know, but you see it in movies too, is that one of the things, guys, with the home front is that the job of the home front is to keep the home fires burning so that when the war is over and people have to return, that they actually have a society to return to. Okay. So I'm going to move in the direction, guys, from social, economic, and political. All right. And this slide right here, guys, is one of the more important of the day. So if you take a look social, we're looking at essentially how do different groups of Americans and people get affected by what's going on abroad within the country. Okay. So women, guys, remember, this is a time period where women do not have the right to vote across the board. A lot of you guys are thinking back to progressivism, hopefully, and you're like, well, Mr. Baker, man, progressivism goes until 1920. This war is over around, 1919 with the treaty. Does the fact that women are going to be very active in the workforce and other means, is that going to have a pretty considerable effect on their ability to eventually gain the right to vote? And guys, without question, I think it's definitely yes, yes, yes. Okay, so women working in the factories, taking care of the families when the men are abroad fighting. This is not unique to World War I, by the way. All right, you see this with World War II. You see this with, wars like Vietnam, etc. Okay, but they're going to obviously do a lot of things to keep the family structure intact. Okay, so therefore, that's important. African Americans, men and women alike, are going to see the opportunity to move to northern cities that are heavily involved in the production side of the conflict. So, guys, you're noticing or will notice some connections to social and economic and political, etc. Okay, so African Americans, are going to be moving to cities like Detroit. They're going to be moving to cities like Chicago in larger numbers, New York City, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Ohio, the list goes on, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because a lot of those places, guys, are industrial centers. And where is it going to be the easiest to actually convert factories to war production? It's going to be industrial centers. And so this great migration, guys, think about what comes to mind when you think migration. I don't know about you, I think of movements. This great migration is going to allow movement to these cities for basically jobs. Guys, I mean, a lot of them are originally from areas of the South. So a lot of people are like, well, Mr. Baker, does the interest in civil rights and being able to go to places that potentially have maybe less discrimination in some ways come up? Sure, right? But at the end of the day, it's also about job opportunity, which those two things sometimes can go hand in hand. All right. Last but not least, with social is definitely going to be the effects on the immigrant population. Okay. So therefore, guys, you'll notice again that concern over, people that are from Germany, people that are from Ireland, people that are from, countries that represent maybe areas that are having more of an effect of things like socialism and communism, Russia, etc. Okay. You're going to be seeing this continued rise of nativism. Okay. So guys, this is another time period where we see that term pop up, right? So that idea that you want America to focus more on natural born Americans, okay? There's a concept out there called xenophobia where people have this fear of foreign influence because maybe they're not sympathetic to American goals in the war, okay? And also, guys, the Ku Klux Klan, I realize a lot of us think of that. We think about it in the context of Reconstruction and the resistance by a lot of people, or some people, I should say, pardon me, to some of the changes that were going on. Guys, the Ku Klux Klan is also going to have a nativist influence because of some of their responses, okay, to some of these immigrant issues that are popping up. Okay. So therefore, immigrants are going to go through a lot of discrimination and prejudice as a result of this war. Okay. What about economics? Well, guys, think about it like this. How would the economy of war change, right? There's a case to be made that you have to go through a process of what's called conversion. Okay. So your economy is going to change. Okay. So first of all, you got to have resources to be able to, provide weapons, to be able to provide food, etc. Okay. And guys, you got to try to be able to convince the American public that they need to be able to go less of more. In other words, they need to be able to limit their use of resources so that there's more resources for the country to put into the war effort. We refer to that as the term rationing. Okay. And guys, rationing was a big focus of the American movements for propaganda, right? The posters, right? Don't eat as much or whatever. Now they said it more eloquently than I just did. Okay. We'll look at that one more on the next slide, but that's important. Also, you got to be able to have the money to be able to also fund a war. So a lot of you guys are like, well, money, when I think of money, I think of taxes. Yes, taxes are going to be obviously paid, because they're also going to come up with what's called a liberty bond or a war bond movement. Okay. And this is going to be a way that they would sell these bonds to the public. The bonds would eventually be sold down the line for money. I'll tell you a story about that if you're in class. And guys, these bonds were worth money and beyond once they matured. There's a word that they use for that. If you've ever gotten a savings bond, it's good for the face value until a certain age. And then after that, you start to accumulate interest. You do have to pay the tax on the interest. Okay. But it's a way of actually gaining American support, or public support, pardon me, for the war effort. Guys, you're talking about raising millions of dollars. And this is not just unique, by the way, to World War I. All right, you see this with World War II. You see the bonds becoming a bigger fixture even as America moves forward beyond just wars. Okay. Now, you also got to have what? Food. You got to feed the soldiers. So the increase of agricultural output. All right, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, by the way, the government is going to take upon a much more hands-on role, okay, with basically managing the economy and a lot of other areas of our society. Ergo, you see, guys, a lot of attention brought to the fact that the government is becoming more directive, all right, of a lot of these activities, all right. And as you can imagine, not everybody's going to be on board with that. But people have to basically oversee these things, and that's going to be what we look at on our next slide. Now, political, guys, we already looked at a couple of things, but again, Wilson is going to be the leader in my mind that really stands out from the American perspective here. A lot of good quotes. This is a war to end all wars. Make the world safe for democracy. That was from his famous war message. Keep in mind, we do create an official draft through the Selective Service Act, which, by the way, is still in existence, but it does change over time. Okay. And we also have, guys, part of this is during the war, and a lot of this is an after effect. But we have what's called the first Red Scare. All right. And guys, a lot of you are wondering, well, why do we call it the first? The reason being because there's a second one that comes after World War II. All right. So a lot of people in the United States are going to be, pretty suspecting of political ideas that they consider to be contrary to American political values. Ergo, things like socialism, communism, okay, Marxism, those things connect quite a bit, etc. Okay. And so therefore, you're going to see, guys, a lot of commitment to trying to convince people to be loyal to our government and our way of life politically. Okay. And because of that, we're going to look at this on the next slide, guys. You're going to see a lot of people that support the passage of what's called the Sedition and Espionage Acts. Okay. So the big picture of these two acts, guys, is that they're going to restrict civil liberties. Okay. So sedition would be, not speaking out, against your government in a time of war, right? Because, hey, you're in a time of war, right? So we need to be more, kind of together as a country, et cetera. All right. And then espionage, same basic thing. If you're interfering with the draft, which some people tried to do, that was considered to be as a major no-no. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, the question is limiting people's civil liberties constitutional? Okay. Now, this is not a new issue. If you go all the way back to the American Civil War, some of the things, guys, with Abraham Lincoln, Lincoln did a lot of things that were very controversial as far as suspending habeas corpus, etc. Okay. In this war, you see this very similar. Wilson does support these two acts. And so one court case came out of it called Schenck versus United States. I'll come back to that in a second. Okay. And this court case, guys, is going to be what we call a landmark case. Okay. So I want you guys to think about at the bottom here. What is this? These two opinions, right? Excerpts say about civil liberties in a time of war, right? And this is a time of declared war, right? This is not, like, okay, we're abroad, we're fighting, but we're not declared. This is an official Senate declaration. Okay. So think about that. First statement here, look at what it says. When a nation is at war, many things that might be said in a time of peace are such a hindrance to its effort that their utterance will not be endured so long as men fight, and that no court could regard them as protected by any constitutional right. Okay. So think about what that quote is getting at. And then let's look at the next one, then we'll kind of break this down. The most stringent protection of freedom of speech would not protect a man in falsely fire in a theater and causing panic. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger, which is where that clause comes from, or that quote, that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has the right to prevent. It is a question of proximity and degree. Okay. Now, those of you that have not looked at the First Amendment, maybe in a while, or maybe even at all, this is obviously civil liberties at work, right? Congress shall not make law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This doesn't really cover that, but the next part of it is pretty much kind of important with the Alien and Sedition, or the Espionage and Sedition Act, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably, to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay. So essentially, guys, what is the court getting at with the Schenck case in 1919, which, by the way, the war is over by then. All right. But this court case starts off and makes itself all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the highest court of the United States, keep in mind. Okay. The way I see it, guys, is that this court case is sending the message that this time of war does perhaps change the way that Congress can go about actually protecting the country, so that maybe further violence and things like that does not basically negatively interfere with the task at hand, which is for American soldiers to be able to carry out their duties abroad, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, the big picture with this, guys, if you go back to the Civil War, even other things that happened with World War II, et cetera, okay, is, does a state of war create a different set of emergency powers that the government actually needs to be not just in observance of, but also use? Okay. And guys, what you notice is that in a lot of ways, that's the one thing that you're going to find out of this court case amongst some other ones. And that is that, this court case sends a message loud and clear, is that if an action or a set of words or something like that poses, again, guys, a clear and present danger, then according to this court case, guys, at this period of time, then they do have the right to intervene. Congress does, the president, et cetera. Okay. My question, guys, to all of you is, do you agree in principle? Okay. And that's not something for me to tell you to land your plane on one way or the other, but it is something to keep in mind, because the First Amendment, guys, says this exactly in 1791 as it did in 1919. All right. So if the amendment itself does not change, then perhaps the interpretation, or at least people's looking at history, does history make the Constitution change? Right. That's something that's not just an issue unique to this court case, but it's an issue that's unique across the board. Okay. All right. Last but not least, you're welcome to stop your screen. We're almost finished. How do we go about informing the public about the war, and how do we go about managing? Well, this slide is pretty big. Okay. First of all, propaganda. Persuading the people about how to think about the war, whether they should support certain things, rationing, buying war bonds, certain views on liberties, that kind of thing. Okay. And guys, the Committee on Public Information, okay, that is a formal group that was created. Its main goal was to basically promote and support the cause of war. In other words, to gain public support. George Creel, that's his picture with the cursor, guys, as you can see. He is basically the architect of a lot of the posters, or shall we say the person who's kind of behind them. All right. And the Uncle Sam I Want You poster that all of you have probably seen before, that is probably the most well-known one that came out of this conflict. Pretty important to keep in mind. Okay. How do you basically get people to buy into rationing? That's going to be the role of the Food Administration led by Herbert Hoover, who, by the way, if you didn't know this, will be a future president in the late 20s and early 1930s. All right. So he's got a big role, telling people, ration, you don't need to eat as much, cheese, or drink as much milk, or, use as much metal or oil or whatever. Okay. And that's also going to be the role, guys, of the War Industries Board. Okay. How do you convert an economy from peacetime to wartime? That's what we're basically talking about with the concept of conversion. Okay. So conversion of the economy, that's going to be the job of this gentleman right there, Bernard Baruch. Okay. And I don't know about all of you guys, but I want you guys to maybe think about this, and we're almost done, but ask yourself the question, guys, if you were one of these three men, okay, who do you think maybe would have the more difficult task? Would it be complete propaganda? Would it be somebody like the Food Administration that if you don't get enough, of course, resources, you're going to really be doing your soldiers a disservice? Would it be somebody like Bernard Baruch, similar kind of thing? If you don't have the resources like guns, ammunition, those two things are similar, of course, troop uniforms, etc. Okay. It's a really tough question, but all these men had a very, very significant role. Okay. Guys, at the end of the day, okay, what I want us to think about for next time, and I hope that today's lesson taught you something about the home front, is, guys, how does a home front adjust in a time of war? All right. How does the economy adjust? How does the political, culture, right, of the country adjust? And for next time, guys, this is going to be where we pick up. What is going to be the biggest obstacle, okay, when you move into the process of trying to achieve peace, knowing that countries are not going to be on the same page about how to go about it? Okay. As always, I appreciate your time. I hope you all learned a lot. It's a neat lesson to kind of look at the war from the perspective of society and not just abroad. Okay. As always, feel free to email me at bakerd@franklincounty.org, and I will see you next time as we finish up with the peace process. Have a good one. Stay safe, and I'll see you later. Take care. Bye-bye.